There's a new spy photo of the C8 Corvette winter testing, I think around Detroit. It's a pretty short clip, but what is kind of interesting and cool is that you can see there's a little tiny lip on the rear of the car, like a little tiny spoiler, and the front of the car, it doesn't have so much camo on it, and you can see that there's a pretty big opening up front, flanked by two openings on the side. So what does that tell us? Potentially, for the aftermarket, there's a lot of space for additional coolers and so forth. Perhaps even the OEM, it's going to have a transmission cooler up there. Not exactly sure, but to me, that tells me a lot. They've probably learned from the DOHC, which had, clearly some cooling issues. Hopefully they've taken that to heart. And, potentially this is going to have a twin turbo. My name is Eric, and I love to make videos about cars. And if you want to come chat, I've got a Discord server set up. There's going to be a link below in the description. I'm also on Instagram. Now, I am a huge sports car fanatic. I've been making a lot of videos on the Supra, and I'm really into that car. However, I love the Corvette. I also like Porsche. There's a lot of brands that I like. I like cars in general, so I try to be fairly unbiased, even though I'm going to be focusing a lot on the C8 Corvette because to me this is the most interesting and exciting affordable sports car that's coming out in the next couple months. So what do we know about the C8 Corvette? Well, there's actually been obviously a ton of speculation about the car, but General Motors has really been holding this one pretty tight to the vest. There's a lot of leaks, there's a lot of rumors, but not a lot of hard facts. But here's what we know. So traditionally, historically, the Corvette has been front engine rear wheel drive. That's sort of been the historical, precedent for this car. Now we're in the C8, and there's obviously going to be a mid-engine in this car. People didn't even believe it 2 or 3 years ago, but you know what? I think General Motors is really having to sort of update the car and jump ahead with the times, because I know there's a lot of purists out there who will probably be very offended by this, but it is difficult to get traction at the rear end of a Corvette when you put the hammer down. It's got roughly 50-50 weight distribution, and when you transfer, when you got all the weight up front with the engine, it's hard to get a lot of power down to the rear end. So putting an engine in the middle actually makes a ton of sense for this car, but that's obviously gonna wrinkle, quite a few feathers. Now, I apologize if I get stuff wrong. I will correct it in a future video. I try to do a lot of research before I do my videos, but I'm learning a lot about these different cars, so here I am under the Corvette. I am doing an LS swap into a Mercedes SLK, which is ridiculous, so I'm kind of familiar with the LS, but here's what we know about the C8 engine, which is not a lot. There's talk about this LT2 engine, and supposedly it's going to be based on the current LT1. So we're still talking about a single cam overhead valve design with the cam in the V of the engine. Rumors are 6.2 liters, making somewhere between 490 and about 500 horsepower. This is probably going to be the base engine, but there's talk about some other rumored engines, possibly a 5.5 liter dual overhead cam setup, maybe twin turbocharged. Not quite sure, but I found some interesting stuff. I'm going to read these quotes that I found on Corvette Blogger, and this is originally a post from Corvette Forum. So this is from a user called Farmington, and he appears maybe he's a GM insider. Who knows? Car manufacturers nowadays, I think, plant these insiders and forums to proactively leak information to the press and vloggers like me. So take it with a grain of salt. What would you say if I told you I personally saw a completely dressed LT6 at work yesterday? This is the dual overhead cam naturally aspirated version. Tubular headers, tri-Y, dual throttle bodies, beautiful red anodized cam covers. The blocks have the same bore as the 6.2, but I'm not sure if the crank stroke is the same. Dry sump, pressed in cylinder liners, integral oil pan, base plate, main caps. And these are different quotes from different spots in the forum. Saw another engine dressed for the C8 the other day. It was an LT2, which is an upgraded LT1 that will be making around 490 to 500 horsepower. Upgrades are mainly the camshaft. Also hearing about an LT8 that sounds like the bad boy twin turbo dual overhead cam version. Heard upwards of 900 horsepower on the dynos. Haven't seen the twin turbo version, but I believe it will be a hot V with the turbos in the V. Hot V means the turbos are where the intake manifold usually reside. So if you can believe this user, Farmington, it sounds like there may be as many as 3 engines available for this car. Potentially the base engine might be something called the LT2, which is based on the current LT1. We're talking about a more traditional setup with overhead valves. It sounds like this LT6 may be a dual overhead cam but naturally aspirated. Don't know how many liters. And then something else, I don't even know what the designation might be, maybe LT8, that is going to be twin turbocharged with turbochargers in the hot V, maybe, you know, very high horsepower, 800-900, something like that. This kind of lines up with what Road and Track and Car and Driver are saying. They're talking about a 5.5 liter V8 turbocharged setup. They've been reporting that the LT6 might be 6.2 liters. So a couple weeks ago there was a leaked video of the Corvette testing at Sebring, and I posted it, and I'll put a link up here to that video as well. And listening to that, to me it really sounds like a flat plane crank V8. It sounds a lot like a Ferrari. Now, of course, we don't know if this engine is going to be for, you know, the C8R, the racing Corvette only. We don't know if it's going to end up in a street production car, but the fact that there might be a flat plane crank V8 is pretty damn exciting to me. Of course, if you know, as you know, the only company is making a flat plane crank V8 domestically is Ford right now, and of course we've got Ferrari over on the other side of the pond. Did I just drop an F-bomb? So what's going to happen with the C7 and the C8 in the introduction phase? So right now the C7, the current generation, is being sunsetted. Of course it is front engine rear drive. So there's a lot of speculation as to what's going to happen with the introduction with the new car. So is the legacy C7 going to be sold alongside the C8? My understanding is that the plant has the capacity to build 2 cars at the same time. So, you know, as we're going through this transition phase, the big question is the front engine rear drive configuration going to be phased out completely for the future? I don't know. Let me know down below in the comments what you think, especially if you're an old school Chevy purist and you've had a couple Corvettes. Be really interested to hear your opinion. Let's talk about pricing. Currently, the base C7 is at about $57,000 US. The Grand Sport is about $66,000. The Z06 is $81,000. So where would the C8 start? So for my money, this is going to be a more expensive car. I know there's been talk. You've heard, you know, Bob Lutz is commenting, oh, it's going to be within $5,000 of the current C7. I'm thinking, and hear me out here, it's going to have to start at about $80,000 minimum, because Chevy isn't going to want to piss off current owners of the C7, especially people who just bought the car. So imagine you've just bought a C7, you spent, let's say, $70,000-ish on it, and they come out with the C8 and it costs, you know, 71 or 73 or something like that. That's going to devalue instantly all the people that just bought the C7. Their $70,000 car is going to be worth like $50,000 almost immediately. I don't think Chevrolet is going to do that. I think they do have some sensitivity, hopefully, to the current owners. So my guess at introduction, this is going to be a more expensive car. It's going to be placed more upscale. Perhaps they won't introduce a base version of the C8 initially. Perhaps they'll introduce a mid-grade version of it. Not too sure about that. So my guess is the car is going to start at least $80,000. So I've got another question for you, and answer in the comments. Do you think that going to a mid-engine design is really too much of a break with tradition? I know it's going to piss off a lot of the purists, a lot of people who have had Corvettes for a long time that really like the current configuration. Is it too much break with tradition? Let me know down below. I certainly know with the Toyota Supra, which I've been covering extensively, that there's a lot of people that are really upset at the fact that the car has been co-developed and designed with BMW. To those people, it's absolute heresy. I know this is a bit different, but let me know. So when is this car going to be revealed? That's the big question. So I was personally at the North American International Auto Show for the press days for the debut of the Supra. I looked around, no Corvette to be found. We've got the Geneva Auto Show, which is coming up pretty soon. It's around March 5th, but that is outside of the US. I think there's no way that General Motors is going to release the Corvette, especially the C8, in Geneva. It's outside of the US, I just don't see it happening. That would just piss off so many people. New York Auto Show, that's around the end of March. March 30th would be the press days. Personally, I think that's too soon. We're seeing cars still driving around in a lot of camo. In fact, we're seeing more camo than we were in the past. So I think that's just a little bit too soon. The Indy 500 at the end of May. Now that would be interesting. That would be an interesting place to introduce it. There's a lot of historical precedent there, obviously, but I'm wondering if there would just be sort of too much competition with the Indy 500 itself to release the car there. I don't know. It's a possibility. I think it's a decent possibility. And then we're left with Pebble Beach in August. Now, I'm thinking if they're going to release it at an actual show event, this is probably the best possibility for it. Or they might release it at some, special event just for, the Corvette. Hopefully I'm going to try to be there. I'm going to try to cover it. I'm going to be following it up. So if you've got any tips or hints or anything or any clues, just message me on Instagram or message me on the Discord server. Let's talk about the transmission. So what transmission is this car going to have? There's been rumors about a DCT, and if you listen to this clip at Sebring and other clips, you can hear the shift points are super fast. I've currently got a DCT in my Audi. I know it's heresy, I don't have a Chevy right now. And it sounds a lot like a DCT to me, the way the engine note drops from one rev point down to another one very quickly. Sounds like a DCT, but it could also be the current 10-speed transmission that's being used in both Ford and Chevy products, which is incredibly fast. Will there be a manual transmission with the Chevrolet Corvette? Now that is something that I think is going to be really super important to a lot of people that are into manual transmissions like myself. I love it. Yeah, I know it's not as fast. So Jalopnik is reporting by a journalist called Bozy Tatarovich. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. He's a journalist for Jalopnik, and I think Motor Trend right now is reporting that Chevrolet has been developing this clutch-by-wire system. So what is a clutch-by-wire system? Well, in a traditional car with a hydraulic system, you depress the clutch pedal and you've got a reservoir either in the brake master cylinder or a separate one, which, is hydraulic, and it's going to push down on the actual clutch with a slave cylinder mounted to usually the side of the transmission. In this clutch-by-wire system, you've got an input, probably a magnetic input on the clutch pedal, which is going to signal to an electric or electronic master slave inside the transmission. So potentially this is going to reduce the entire, or rather eliminate the entire hydraulic system that we've been so used to. Now we don't know if this is actually going to happen. It's interesting because Porsche has been doing mid-engine cars for a long time. In fact, I had a Cayman S, which I love that car, and it had a traditional classic, hydraulic clutch system. So, if General Motors develops this, it's interesting. It's certainly going to do away with, clutch feel, although I guess it's debatable how much clutch feel there is anyhow. Personally, I would love to see a manual transmission in the C8 Corvette. I just love driving a manual. I know it's not as fast. That's not the point. The point is how much driver engagement and how much enjoyment am I going to get from the car. Again, for my money, manual transmission is absolutely where it's at. I saw in Road and Track magazine recently that the rear hatch area around the glass has got this interesting heat extraction system with these vents. So that's obviously to pull, hot air away from the engine compartment. It's being fed in, I think on the sides, probably going to some radiators over there. I'm not sure how much actual cooling is coming in on these side vents. Perhaps one is for radiator and one is for cooling. We don't really know that yet, but this heat extraction system looks pretty interesting. It's been really heavily covered up in a lot of recent spy photos, so I think that's something that's probably pretty exclusive to General Motors and probably not a lot of other car manufacturers are using. I want to give a big shout out to midenginecorvetteforum.com for the invite to the community. Thank you so much. I'm going to start posting there. And there's a user there by the name of Charles Cronley, and he's been doing some 3D renders. I'm going to put them up on the screen right now. There's this really nice one of a blue car, looking at the front bumper, and you can see, I think what he's doing is he's taking what seems to be the current spy photographs with the car kind of covered up in camo and taking his elements and basically doing his interpretation of it. I particularly like these LED light elements that sort of remind me a little bit of the Ferrari, and of course, there's always been a little bit of competition between Ferrari and Corvette, I think, in terms of design. I've got an amazing community called Patreon, and I've got patrons in it who are helping to support this channel by helping me pay for flight expenses and stuff like that to travel. And I want to thank specifically Furious Grommel, Real 6, Jason Johnson, Squirrel Pope, Lynn Chester, and Jason Townsend. You guys are awesome. You're helping the community so much. There's a lot of benefits at Patreon. You get more access to what I'm doing. There's going to be behind the scenes stuff, get me doing Q&As. We're going to have private chats, all that kind of cool stuff. If you want to support this channel by subscribing, that would be super awesome. Follow me on Instagram. I'll put a link to the free Discord server down below. Thank you. I'll see you guys in the next video.